Chapter 1. Bad Boys. Lem Fuller leaned back in his wooden swivel chair and stretched his long, lanky legs under the battle-scarred but neatly organized desk. He glanced up at the wall clock, listening to its steady tick-tock, which seemed to echo in the stillness of the cramped railroad depot office as the pendulum swung to and fro. 4 o'clock. Lem pulled a silver-plated watch from his vest pocket, snapped it open, and checked the time. Right on time, he thought, when he heard the whistle of the approaching southbound train in the distance. His eyes strayed to the picture inside the watch, a younger version of himself, when his now gray mustache had been a dark brown. Next to him in the picture was Martha, his bride on the day the picture was taken. He smiled briefly to himself, thinking of home. The day was almost over for him. He would retreat to his comfortable little house at the edge of town. Martha would be waiting for him with a warm meal. Afterwards, he would sit back in his favorite easy chair and put his feet up. Well, he thought, as he put the watch back inside his vest, pushed back his chair and stood up. Better get outside and meet the train. As Lem stepped out onto the board platform, the late afternoon sun was already descending toward the distant horizon, and its bright rays struck Lem's eyes directly, causing him to squint. He turned his head away and looked along the track. The southbound whistle blared again as the train approached. Looks like no passengers again today, he thought. Coming too fast. Better get ready for the mail. As was usual, if there were no passengers aboard to let off or no one on the platform to board, the southbound would just roar right on through the sleepy little depot of Pine Gap. The mail pouch would be tossed to Lem as the train rolled past. The pounding of the engine, the clank of the wheels, and the rattle of the passing cars on rails roared in Lem's ears. The sun was blotted out intermittently and flashed between the cars as they rumbled on. As the baggage car approached, Lem readied himself, saw the baggage door slightly open part way. Lem spread his arms apart, reaching upward to catch the sack. It flew from the passing car. Lem's bony hands snatched at it deftly, the bright sun flashing in his face and eyes as he looked upward into the blinding light. The light was the last thing he saw, feeling nothing, hearing no thundering crash of a 6-gun as a bullet plowed into the back of his skull, pitching his thin frame to the wooden floor of the platform in a crumpled heap. 2 men wearing bandanas over their faces raced toward the fallen body. The taller, dark-haired man pulled the sack free from Lem's stiff, gripping fingers. The other man, shorter and stockier, rolled the body over, making sure the depot man was dead. They then ran toward the edge of the platform. 2 other men, also wearing bandanas, rode around the end of the platform. One was young, a shock of blonde hair showing beneath his battered brown Stetson, and riding a fine-looking sorrel stallion and leading a saddled horse behind him. The other rider also led a saddled horse. The outlaw with the sack and his partner swung up into the saddles, were respectively handed the reins, and all 4 rode off to the north, leaving a cloud of dust behind them, and a still motionless form alone on the platform. A slight breeze worried Lem Fuller's thin gray hair. His bloody fingers lay stretched outward on the planking. Just out of reach of his lifeless fingers, a silver-plated watch had fallen, its cover open. Red speckles of blood dotted the picture of a happy couple from long ago. Lou Pratt, the wizened old driver of the Elkhorn stage, snapped his big black snake whip and cracked it behind the ears of the lead team of his 4-up. "Get up," he commanded around his cud of chewing tobacco, a brown stain of juice dripping from the corner of his mouth into his bushy red and gray-streaked beard. It was already near mid-morning, and they were behind schedule after resting too long at the last relay station, where the station manager's wife had supplied them with ample portions of apple pie. Not having passengers on this trip, they tarried too long with the hospitality. Stubby Bennett, the guard, leaned his grizzled, flabby cheek lazily against his shotgun barrel, whose stock rested on the floor of the boot. the rocking of the lurching coach lulling him to sleep. The run always proved to be routine and uneventful, and Stubby had given up vigilance many trips ago. The trail ahead narrowed as it wound around an outcropping of trees to the right, but Lou had made this run many times before, and today was no different. He pushed the double teams hard around the bend, not allowing them to slacken in speed, not anticipating the large boulder that now blocked the trail. He didn't see it in time. The horses skidded to a halt, rearing high, struggling and entangling themselves in harness trappings. The stage slewed sharply to the left, and the left front wheel snapped. The coach crashed down on the axle, twisting and rolling, toppling Lou from the boot, tumbling him onto the hard packed dirt alongside the trail. Stubby jolted awake, dumbfounded as to what was happening, fell over backwards, landing on the ground just behind Lou, but not far enough from the crashing coach to avoid being pummeled by the heavy frame of the coach that pinned him down. His back bent backward over a large rock, snapping his spine and sending waves of nauseating pain throughout his tortured body. Lou rolled away from the crash, dust spewing over his frame as the coach barely missed him. "Stubby!" he shouted, realizing his partner's plight as he tried to recover and rise. The last thing Lou saw was Stubby's eyes, wide with terror and his face contorted in pain. He had not heard the horses of the 4 horsemen who had ridden up behind him. The lean, dark-haired rider, his 6-gun in his hand, pulled trigger. Flame belched from the muzzle, and Lou fell flat next to Stubby, never knowing what had hit him. From where he lay, Stubby could not see what had happened. A shadow passed over his face, and for the first time he could see the burly man who stood over him, grinning through the stubble of his puffy cheeks. The man pointed his pistol within an inch of Stubby's face, the muzzle looming and gaping wide. Shorty closed his eyes tightly, sweat pouring off his pain-racked and terrified face. He didn't even hear the roar of the 6-gun, nor feel the hot burst of muzzle flash as the bullet wasted his face and head. The burly outlaw smiled victoriously to himself and slammed his pistol into the leather holster on his hip. The lean, dark-haired man, still on his horse, ordered, come on, hurry it up. Get the strong box and mail pouch and let's get out of here. Kid!" He turned toward the young blonde-haired man aboard the sorrel. "You and Harv, get down and give Gil a hand." Within minutes, the outlaws had their booty and rode off, once again leaving death and destruction in their wake. Chapter 2. Bank Robbery. The sleepy little town of Sand Flats was nestled in a wide valley. The mountains on the eastern and western sides were too far away to shade the quiet community from the blazing hot sun that seemed to bake the little village in unbearable heat midday during the summer. The town seemed to close up at noontime, few people on the streets, as if everyone had taken shelter. The street was quiet, not even a dog barking. Here and there a mutt lay belly down in what feeble shade it could find. No one seemed to notice the 4 dust-covered riders as they guided their horses casually down the center of the main street and pull up in front of the local bank. "Should be a piece of cake, Blackie," Gil said to the lean, dark-haired rider. "Don't get too sure, Gil. You make mistakes that way," then said to the other, "Kid, you stay here and hold the horses. You know what to do if we run into trouble." The blonde-haired rider nodded his understanding. The 3 men dismounted and sauntered up onto the wooden boardwalk. The door to the bank opened, and a man in a black broadcloth suit and black flat-crowned Stetson emerged. He stopped suddenly and stared with slate-blue eyes at the 3 men standing in his path. "Pardon me, gentlemen," he said in a low, calm, even voice, and continued forward as the 3 hard-case-looking men parted to each side, allowing him to pass. The man noticed the youth on the sorrel horse and the other 3 horses at the tie rack, but paid little attention. Blackie stood for a moment watching the man stride across the dusty street. his dark brows pulled together in thought, trying to remember where he had seen this man before. Then he nodded to his companions, and they entered the bank. It seemed dark inside, compared to the bright sunlight, and it took a moment for their eyes to adjust. It was fairly empty inside, almost as empty as the street outside, save for an elderly sun-bonneted lady who was turning from the cashier's cage, drawing the strings of her purse together as she hurried to the door to continue with the rest of her business in town. Blackie tipped his hat as she passed by, ignoring him with her nose in the air. So far, so good. Only the bank manager and a clerk were left there, behind the two barred cages. Harv and Gil separated and strolled to different sides of the room. Harv placed himself next to the front window so he could watch the street. Blackie stepped up to the window that was manned by an elderly, rotund figure of a man whom Blackie assumed to be the manager. He always liked to deal with the man in charge. "May I help you, sir?" the bank manager asked, with an oily, practiced tone and a forced smile, showing his white buck teeth. "Well, yes you can," Blackie grinned, a playful gleam in his eyes. "I'd like to make a withdrawal. On account, you might say." "Account?" The manager lost his smile and looked puzzled. "Do I know you? You say you have an account?" "Why, yes, sir," Blackie smiled. The big black muzzle of his pistol appeared and pressed under the banker's chin. "On account, I'll blow your head off if you don't give us all the money you got." The bank clerk in the next cage jerked with a start and started to back away. "Don't move, sonny." Gil's deep voice boomed, his arm outstretched, his big pistol aimed at the young man's head. The hammer clicked to full cock. Do as he says, Dan," the banker stammered, his neck folds quivering beneath his chin. "Smart man," Blackie chided. Then to the clerk, "Listen to your boss, boy, and maybe you'll live to be an old goat like him. Now bag up the money, boy." He jabbed the muzzle deeper into the banker's neck. Get it for them," the old man murmured. Why, yes, sir," the clerk stuttered as he nervously started to clean out the drawers and stuff the currency into money sacks. "Hurry it up," Gil ordered. Harv at the window straightened and turned sharply. "Hey, Blackie," he called. "That dude is coming back. Headed this way?" "Oh no," Blackie groaned, rolling his eyes toward the ceiling with frustration. "Now I remember where I saw that Jasper before. His name is Jack Clayton. Works for the government. He's big trouble." "What do I do, boss?" Harv asked. "Let him come in. When he passes, you step in behind him and shoot him in the back." Then to the old man, "Keep your trap shut. You warn Clayton, you're a dead man. Got that?" The banker swallowed hard, his round eyes bulging. "Why, yes, I got it." "Gil," Blackie ordered, "get the sacks he already filled. We'll take what we got and get out fast after Harv shoots the G-man." Gil bounded forward and scooped up 3 sacks of cash. "Here he comes," Harv warned. All went quiet as they waited. Harv pressed his back Fiat against the wall next to the door. They could hear approaching boot steps on the plank sidewalk out front. They saw the door knob slowly turn. The latch clicked open, and the door started to swing open. "Mr. Clayton," the old man shouted. "Look out!" Blackie's quick trigger finger squeezed spasmodically. The pistol roared loudly within the confines of the bank, and the banker's fat body crashed backwards against the wall, blood splattering on ceiling and floor. With quick reflex, Clayton flung the door wide open, slamming it into Harv's body where he stood behind the door. At the same time, Jack threw himself to the sidewalk planking, rolling onto his side and drawing his 6-gun from the shoulder holster beneath his coat. It was out and spewing flame as Harv stepped out from behind the door, gun in hand. Clayton's first shot plowed into Harv's midsection. His body doubled forward and his pistol fired once, splintering the floorboards beneath him as he fell. Clayton rolled back to the side of the door, using the jamb for cover. He reached his arm around the corner and fired randomly twice. pistol fire erupted into a hail of bullets, splintering the casing of the doorway as Jack drew back out of the line of fire. Then the firing ceased, momentarily, and Jack catapulted himself erect, charging through the open doorway and leaping over Harv's fallen body, landing in a crouched stance, his pistol flaming toward the outlaws who were now exiting the back door of the bank. Gil was last man out. Clayton's bullet crashed into the closing door. Gil turned, reached through the gap in the doorway, and fired back. The slug buzzed past Jack's head like an angry bee. Clayton ducked backward, caught his balance, and lunged for the door and flung it open, ready for returning fire, but there was none. The alley behind the bank was empty and dark with shadow. Then he saw the two men emerge into the sunlight of the street. He should have gone out the front of the bank. He chastised himself. He could have headed them off. But there was no time for self-recrimination. He leaped into the alley and ran full speed toward the street. He was just entering the street when he saw the outlaws aboard their horses, hightailing it out of town with the blonde-haired kid who had been holding the horses. He was too late as he ran to a stop in the middle of the street. He had raised his pistol to fire again, but realizing they were already out of range, he eased the hammer off and let the 6-gun hang loosely at his side, pointed straight down toward the ground. He sighed with regret and defeat as he watched the outlaws ride off victoriously with their loot, once again leaving death and destruction behind. Chapter 3. Pursuit. 3 outlaws pushed their mounts at full speed across the flatlands beneath the big buttes to the north, then turned east. They had been driving hard for the last 3 hours. Lather flecked the horses' flanks and rumps, and the mounts were beginning to falter with the constant drive. Midday, they pulled up in the shade of one of the buttes to let the horses blow. Blackie looked back the way they had come. His dark eyes squinted as he strained to make out the faint whisper of a dust cloud far behind. "That damn Jehu is still back there," Blackie growled, frustration in his voice. "All day he's been dogging our trail. He must be part Apache. He just keeps on coming." "Just our ornery bad luck," Gil complained. "He had to be there in that dumpy town. First time we didn't get everything we went after." "No use crying about it, Gil. We're lucky we got away with our skins. Besides, we got plenty anyhow." He patted the bulging saddlebags behind him. "Lucky, I figured out where I saw that Jasper before. I seen him one time, down in Laredo. He's Jack Clayton, a government man. Too bad we didn't stop him. He's not one who ever quits." "Too bad about Harv, too," the kid interjected. Blackie glared at him. He knew the risks. Besides, now it's a 3-way split. The kid's face grew grim, realizing Blackie might like a 2-way or even a 1-way split. He refrained from saying anything more. Blackie dismounted, still holding the reins as he continued to look back. "Clayton's going to keep on coming no matter what. One thing is for sure, though, these horses are played out. We've got to rest them or we'll never outrun him." "He's got to rest his too," the kid said. "That big black of his has as much stamina as that sorrel you're riding. I wish our horses were as good as yours, kid." The kid's eyes grew darker and even more suspicious. "Don't go getting any ideas about taking this horse from me, Blackie," he warned. "Relax, kid," Blackie retorted. "I wasn't suggesting anything like that." Then he added, "But I'm thinking that instead of trying to outrun him, we have it out with him once and for all." "Meaning what?" Gil snapped with irritation. "Meaning we let him catch up to us. There is a pass up ahead. High banks on both sides. Rocks and trees for cover. 2 of us on one side, 1 on the other. When he rides through, we blast him." "Seems to me we tried that before," Gil growled. "We found out it wasn't so easy." "Of course, it's not easy, but it's what we got to do. But if you want to ride on and leave your share behind, go ahead." Gil pursed his thick lips in anger and grunted. "No, I'm staying. Let's get it done." Jack Clayton could no longer see the dust clouds from his fleeing quarry. Either they had outrun him, or disappeared behind some temporary cover in the trail, or they had holed up waiting for him in ambush. Probably the latter, he thought. Their horses had to be played out, as was his own big black stallion, Regret, so named because he could give his master, and especially others, just cause for lots of regrets. The big black was strong and had a lot of stamina and fortitude. Clayton's adept horsemanship and care for his equine friend kept the big stallion at an even pace, conserving his strength and energy. Gradually, steadily, but surely they were gaining on the three outlaws up ahead. Clayton had been in Sand Flats, checking on a report of counterfeit currency that had been discovered at the bank. For months, he had been scouring the Southwest, following a trail of phony bills. As special agent for the Justice Department, he had been assigned by his boss, John Randolph, director of the Justice Department's Western Division and headquartered outside of St. Joe, Missouri, to track down the source of these illegal bills and banknotes that had been plaguing Arizona, Nevada, and New Mexico. It was only chance that put him at the scene of the bank holdup and stepped into the path of the bank robbers. Fortunately, before he had gone far from the bank, he recalled a wanted poster with a picture of one of the men he had just seen. Blackie Darrow. The sleepy town of Sand Flats was not used to trouble. The only lawman in town was an old man who had never done anything more than housing the town drunk from time to time in the seldom-used jail. With no adequate law in town, Clayton had taken it upon himself to ride out in pursuit of the outlaws. The counterfeit currency assignment he would put on hold for now. After all, he still had no solid lead and he was getting nowhere. Now he was relentlessly on the robber's trail. He sat tall and easy in the saddle, his broad shoulders complementing his somewhat above-average height. He had discarded his suit coat and fancy vest, and now wore a black leather vest to conceal his shoulder holster. The black-handled butt of a six-gun protruded from the cutaway black holster tied low on his right hip. As the government man plodded on in pursuit, he became more and more wary. He had not seen a sign of the bandits ahead for quite some time. Their tracks, however, told him he was still on their trail. As he scanned the trail ahead, he noted a pass that would be ideal for an ambush. If he were the outlaws with tired horses, he would be holed up there waiting in ambush for him to ride through. The pass was narrow with little cover on either side of the trail. What cover of small rocks and scrub brush there was would be insufficient, especially if ambush came from high up on both sides of the pass. Cover from one side of the pass would surely expose him to danger from the opposite wall. Jack knew he would have to take his chances. He would have to spring the trap. He would keep Regret as his steady pace as he entered the pass, as if he were not expecting the attack. That was sure to come. As the G-Man rode into the pass, the outlaws were ready for him. Gil was in position, with a rifle, behind a large boulder at the top of the bank to the left of the trail. Blackie was in a similar position to the right of the pass. Behind him, the kid held the three horses in abeyance. Steadily, Jack rode into the pass, every sense alert, eyes darting to and fro, glancing toward the walls above. He felt Regret's sense of danger as the big black's body quivered beneath him. Regret's ears drew back, and he snorted nervously, confirming Jack's suspicion of ambush. Then it all erupted into a fleeting instant of violent attack. From the corner of his eye, Jack spotted the shadow of a man rise above a rock on the right side of the pass, sunlight gleaming off the barrel of his Winchester. Regret skidded to a sudden stop, reared on his hind legs, his forelegs pawing at empty air, and his entire frame twisting around in the middle of the trail as the attacker's rifle cracked and a bullet passed through behind Regret's neck where Clayton would have been if not for Regret's sudden move. Clayton half fell backward, half slid across Regret's rump. snagging his Winchester from the rifle boot as he went. Regret spun around, spewing dust with his tramping hoofs and running back down the trail from where they had just come. The dust and the body of the fleeing horse gave Clayton momentary cover as he rolled toward the cover of a rock along the trail. The rifle cracked again and again as Regret moved out of the line of fire, revealing Clayton's rolling body. Dirt splattered his face as the slugs tore into the earth, barely missing him with each roll. A bullet spanged off the rock as Jack rolled behind it, came up, throwing his rifle barrel over the rock and firing in rapid succession to push the ambusher back into cover. A rifle cracked from behind him. A chip of stone from the rock stung his arm, and the bullet ricocheted past his cheek. Clayton rolled to his right onto the flat of his back, levering his Winchester and firing 3 times rapidly, spraying the top of the rim. The man up there ducked down, but firing resumed from the other side of the pass. Bullets spanging off the rock. The G-man rose, threw a shot in that direction, knowing the man behind him would resume firing once he saw Clayton was distracted. The man rose to fire, but Jack had already flung himself backward onto his back again and fired at the same instant as his attacker. Jack's slug caught Gil high in the left shoulder. Gil staggered backward, and his shot went low, plowing into the dirt several feet in front of where Jack lay. Jack levered his Winchester twice more. Gil's body doubled forward as he took a round in the stomach. He dropped his rifle and pitched forward, tumbling down the bank and rolling down the rocky scree. Jack whipped his body around and brought his rifle up along the right side of the rock. Blackie, furious at the sight of Gil's death, poured lead at the trapped government man. Clayton pressed close to the ground as the bullets pounded close to his hiding position. Blackie fired again and again and again. He paused. There was no return fire. Had he at last gotten the G-man? He waited. Silence filled the pass. Meanwhile, the kid had been holding the horses and had seen Gil's fate. Two-way split, he thought. No, Blackie would never split half with him. One way split for Blackie only. That meant Blackie would probably kill him once he had eliminated the government man. Well, 2 can play that game, the kid thought. He glanced at the bulging saddlebags on Blackie's horse. Blackie was still occupied, throwing lead at Clayton. The kid swallowed hard. Now was the time to do it. He hesitated, then resolved. Quickly, he pulled the saddlebags from Blackie's saddle, flung them over the sorrel's neck, and vaulted into the saddle. He pushed the big sorrel into the 2 remaining horses and waved them into a run down the bank. With a kick to the sorrel's ribs, the kid urged the big stallion down the rocky side of the bank toward the trail. Blackie's firing had stopped. In the silence that ensued, Blackie heard the kid's horse crashing and sliding down the rocky slope. "What the, He started, whirling around to see horse and rider. A quick glance at his own fleeing horse told him the saddlebags were missing. The kid had stolen the loot. Momentarily forgetting about the G-man below, Blackie stood up and swung his rifle toward the kid. He fired quickly and missed as the kid ducked low in the saddle. The kid had barely made it to the trail below when he fired a second time, but his shot went wild as he felt the sharp sting of a bullet across his forehead, not hearing the blast from Clayton's rifle that had cracked simultaneously with his own. Blackie's weapon flew into the air, and he grasped at his forehead and pitched backward down the receding side of the bank. Clayton jumped to his feet and ran into the trail. He could see the retreating rider and sorrel stallion speeding northward on the trail. Then the other 2 horses came into the pass. Jack saw there were no saddlebags nor sign of loot on either horse. Judging from what he had just seen, he was sure there had been a falling out of thieves, and the escaping rider now had the loot. Regret came loping back up the Inhaliad by his master. Clayton patted his friend's sweaty neck and said, "Well, old son, we still have the other one and the bank's money to get, but you need a rest first, so I'll walk a while and follow along easy like." Chapter 4. Menacing Range. It was mid-morning of the second day since Jack Clayton started trailing the young rider on the sorrel horse. Jack was impressed by the stamina of the golden stallion. He obviously was as good, if not better, than Regret, for the horse and rider managed to stay well ahead and had long since disappeared from view, gaining a larger and larger lead on the government man and his stalwart black. Fortunately, the trail of his quarry was plain. The sorrel was well shod with quality new shoes that left deep imprints in the trail. There was a distinctive star marking on each shoe. Jack had trailed the kid steadily northward and had crossed over the border into New Mexico about an hour and a half ago. He was now riding through a wide valley that seemed to spread out for miles. As he continued through the valley, he spotted more and more cattle grazing off the parched grass of the range. The cattle themselves looked underfed and were beginning to become gaunt. The range looked like good land, but it was dry. Not like desert, but good land that had seen better days with ample water, but had recently faded into substandard grazing range. Noting the brands of the cattle, Jack knew he must be on a spread called the Barham. Feeling for the plight of the cattle's thirst, he thought of his own need for water. He had passed a dry stream about a mile back and another further back that only held a trickle. Looking ahead, he saw 5 or 6 head of cattle bunched together, their heads down. Jack guided Regret closer and saw there was a shallow creek and the cattle were watering. As Jack rode up, he hazed the cows away from the creek bank and rode up to it. The stream, though shallow, looked cool and sparkling in the morning sun as it rippled over the stone-covered bottom of the bed. Clayton dismounted and led Regret to the edge of the stream. He tossed the reins over the big black's neck, out of the way so he could drink freely from the stream. Regret eagerly pushed his muzzle into the cool liquid and drank with relish. Jack removed his canteen from the saddle and stepped upstream a little ways away from where Regret was now watering, as had the cows before him. He squatted and dipped the canteen into the gurgling stream and watched the bubbles as the vessel filled. Then, retrieving the filled canteen, he lifted it toward his parched lips. Then, without warning, the crack of rifle fire broke the stillness of the air. A gaping hole appeared in his canteen, and it flew with tremendous force from his hands and landed on the opposite creek bank. Stunned, fingers stinging and shaking, he whirled around quickly, without standing and reaching for the pistol at his hip. His hand was on the pistol butt and halfway out of the holster when the rifle cracked again. A bullet slammed into the wet ground in front of him, splattering him with mud. "Leave it alone," a sharp voice snapped. As Jack looked up, he saw the gaping muzzle of a Winchester, .44 to 40, pointed menacingly at him. He let his pistol slip back into his holster and started to rise slowly, his arms spread and his hands held upward, his slate eyes staring at the rider and horse before him. He was surprised to see that the rider was a young woman wearing jeans, pistol belt, and range attire, much like any other male waddy, holding the rifle on him, her blue eyes glaring at him over the barrel of the Winchester. The morning breeze ruffled her curly blonde hair. "I was just getting a drink," he started to say, but was cut short. "I know who you are and what you are. You've got no business on Matson Range." Jack grinned ever so slightly. "Yes, and just who do you think I am?" She jerked the muzzle up and squeezed off a round. Jack flinched as if he could duck the flying projectile over his head. Regret shied nervously and stamped in the water, splashing frantically. He snorted, "I think you are a dead man if you don't get off this land, pronto. Don't come back, and tell Belden to keep the rest of his hired goons out." "I don't know who this Belden is, and I assure you, I don't work for him." She eyed him keenly, not wavering the rifle barrel. "I admit you don't talk like the rest of them, but I want you out of here now." "I just stopped for water. My horse and I are mighty thirsty." "The horse can drink," she conceded. "You can't." Well, I think he's had his fill, Jack answered. Then get on him and go back the way you came. She backed her horse off, giving him room to move, all the while keeping the rifle level. You win, lady, Jack sighed, stepped around Regret, took the reins, and pulled him from the stream and turned him around. With a resolute glance at the young lady, Jack stepped into the saddle, settled himself, and guided the black around his captor. Thanks for the hospitality, he said sarcastically, as he rode past her and headed back in the direction from whence he came. He walked Regret for a ways and then noticed the tracks the lady's horse had made. The same fine quality horseshoes with the star markings as the sorrel's shoes. He then kicked Regret into a lope and rode off to the south, not bothering to look back to see if the woman was still there. Jack's heart began to race with excitement as he rode. Chances were that the similarities in horseshoes was not a coincidence. The kid on the sorrel was probably from around here, maybe even from the Matson spread. Since he couldn't cross Bar M land, Jack decided the best thing he could do was to hang somewhere around the area. He had passed a road a couple of miles back that had a signpost pointing west saying, Town of Promise, 5 miles. An interesting name for a town, he thought. He would meander in and see if this town held any promises for him. An hour later, tired and dusty, Clayton spied the town of Promise almost a mile away, silhouetted on the horizon against the clear blue sky and shimmering noonday sun. The trip had been quiet and uneventful, and his mind wandered, thinking about the bandit kid and the strange young lady with deadly intent he had just met earlier. Only the sound of the birds and the clip-clop of Regret's hoofs broke the stillness of the day. Suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted. He thought he heard voices in the wind, laughter and excitement, the sound of laughing, giggling children in the sky. He mumbled to himself. He was hearing things, but no, the sounds came from the sky. And all at once, the darkness of shadow fell over him. He gazed upward and saw it. About 100 feet above his head was a hot air balloon. A large basket hung from cables beneath it. Jack could see there were adults and children aboard, but he could not see clearly enough to know how many or who they were. Now what in blazes is a hot air balloon doing out here? He thought to himself as he watched the airborne conveyance continue on toward town ahead of him, gradually losing altitude as it approached the settlement. Chapter 5. Promised Land. As Clayton and Regret entered the town limits, he could see the bustle of activity and the streets were filled with people. Banners were strung high across the street saying, Welcome to Promise, Promise Challenge, Competition Days, Irrigation Project Fundraiser. Up ahead at the other end of town, Jack could see the hot air balloon setting down in an open field across from a large public gazebo. A large crowd was gathered there for some sort of ceremony or political speech-making. The street was crowded with traffic. Clayton threaded his way between the wagons, surreys, and mounted horsemen and edged his horse to the side, pulling up in front of the cattleman's hotel. He dismounted, tied Regret to the hitch rail, and stepped up the 3 steps to the porch of the hotel. Inside, activity was just as hurried and congested. Traffic filled the lobby. He pushed his way through the crowd toward the clerk's desk. A throng of people were lined up around this area, and he could hear the clerk telling the crowds, rather emphatically, that the hotel was full up. There was no use pursuing the matter. Jack reconciled himself to the fact that he would not find accommodations here. Excuse me a moment, sir, Jack said, grasping the arm of a tall, rotund man in a summery light gray suit who was shuffling by. The man jerked to a halt, a look of surprise and annoyance creeping across his fat face. Jack asked, What's going on here? Why is this town so busy? It's sort of celebration. Well, more fundraiser, the man answered curtly. For the irrigation project, water from Lake Doria will bring Promise back to life. Everybody knows that. He rushed on and out the front door. Sure, Jack said to himself. Everybody knows that. He turned and strode back outside. He stood there for several moments, looking up and down the street, listening to the sounds of hurried activity. A tinny piano was playing in the Blue Ox Saloon down the street, and drunken cowboys were stumbling around in the crowds. Glancing to the other end of town, he saw the hot air balloon parked in the field beyond the gazebo. He stepped down and untied his horse. Well, old son, let's go see what's going on down there. He stepped back into the saddle, settled himself, then gingerly backed Regret into the crowd, turned the black's neck, and guided him through the throngs, moving slowly towards the festivities in the park. As Clayton entered the open field at the far end of town, he could see an area set aside where wagons and buggies were parked. Ropes were strung between trees, making a picket line to tether horses. The hot air balloon was unloading its passengers as they climbed clumsily out of the large basket. A middle-aged couple and their 2 children, a boy and girl of school age. A queue had formed with several other families waiting for a ride. A large placard off to the right said, "Professor Deeks' hot air balloon rides $10 per person." A tall, thin man in a long black coat and top hat stood in the basket. A broad grin spread over his clean-shaven, pinched face. Clayton assumed this must be Professor Deek. Jack could hear the eloquence of the distinguished-looking elderly man in a gray swallowtail coat standing at the podium in the center of the gazebo as he rode by, reining the big black behind the standing crowd and watching quietly from his perch aboard the big stallion. Periodically, the crowd would roar with approval or applaud with agreement. Jack patted Regret on his sleek ebony neck and listened. In a moment, ladies and gentlemen, the speaker spoke in slow, deliberate eloquence. I shall introduce to you Matt McCall, the engineer in charge of the irrigation project. He will give you a full report on the progress of his study. He pointed toward a tall, middle-aged man in work clothes, sitting with 2 other finely dressed elders behind him. Jack's keen eyes roamed the crowd methodically, noting everything and everybody. Only one person in the crowd attracted his attention. A young blonde-haired man of medium height and slight build stood off to the side at the rear of the crowd. He was staring in Jack's direction, thumbs hooked in the cartridge belt of his low-slung holster on his right hip. Jack wished he had paid more attention when he had first run into the 4 bandits at Sand Flats. He couldn't remember what the young blonde-haired bandit had looked like, but he certainly was of the same build, age, and coloring as the man before him. "Thank you, Mr. Mayor," Clayton heard the man in work attire say as he stepped up to the podium. There was applause, and the ant started to speak, but Jack was not paying attention. The blonde kid was swaggering toward him, a cocky smirk on his face. Jack leaned back in his saddle, stiffened, and braced himself for trouble. The young man continued his approach, slowly, steadily, deliberately. The G-man readied, watching every move with intensity. The kid stopped directly in front of Jack and Regret. He smiled wryly, his feet spread shoulder distance apart, his thumbs still hooked in his pistol belt. He just stood there a moment looking straight ahead at horse and rider. Jack remained silent. Then the kid spoke. "That's quite a cayuse you've got there, mister," the boy said casually with admiration in his voice. Jack relaxed a bit. "Yes, sir, that's the finest black stallion I ever seen. You entering him in the race?" "Race?" Jack quizzed. "Yeah," the kid said. "You are here for the race, aren't you?" His tone was pleasant and not at all threatening. "If I had a horse like that, I'd be in it. There's $100 prize. Cost you 20 to enter, though." "Afraid not, son," Jack answered. "I'm just passing through. Saw all the excitement and was curious. So I just stopped to watch a bit." "Too bad," the kid said. "I bet you'd win." "Say that's not a bad idea," the kid added. "I would bet on you. Split the winnings with you. We'll get good odds. Everyone will be betting on Marcy Matson's big sorrel." Sorrel? Jack thought. Matson? That was Matson range he had been ordered off of. Was that Marcy Matson with the rifle? This Marcy Matson, Jack asked. Do you know her? No, sir, the kid answered. But everybody's talking about her and her horse. They say he's the fastest horse around here, but that horse of yours looks like he could give it a good run. Well, kid, Jack said, the applause of the crowd and the rhetoric of the speaker only background noise. This old boy is my friend. I take good care of him. I don't run him or push him when it's not necessary. The boy shook his head. Sure wish you'd change your mind. The crowd roared again, and then was drowned out by the roar of gunfire and the thunder of hooves. The kid spun around on his heels. What the? He started. Clayton jerked his head up with a startle to see the trio of riders spurring their mounts at a full gallop through town and firing their pistols into the air, just to make noise. Regret stamped and snorted, chomping at his bit, kicking up turf and dust. Clayton pulled back on the reins to restrain him. The crowd screamed and started to run in all directions, pulling their children with them or gathering them up in their arms to avoid the onslaught of the impending riders as they forced themselves into the throng of spectators. The rider in the lead guided his mount to the gazebo and actually tried to force it onto the platform. The dignitaries on stage fell back toward the back railing, trying to escape the assault. Such wanton behavior and recklessness without regard for human safety could not be let go unchecked, Jack would have thought if he had taken the time to think. He merely reacted. Lessening the restraint he had placed on the big black, Clayton let him catapult forward, just missing the kid that darted out of his way just in time, at the same time snaking his lariat from the saddle, twirling it twice and letting it fly. It caught the rider at the gazebo, looping over the man's broad shoulder and pulling tight as Regret dug his hoofs into the ground as a trained cowpony would after its rider roped a calf. The rider fell over backwards out of the saddle and landed with a thud on his broad back, grunting with surprise as the wind was knocked out of him. The rider behind him reacted quickly and spun his horse around to see Clayton, but too late. Jack had already dropped the lariat to the ground, wheeled Regret, and plunged into the rider. Jack slipped his boot free of one stirrup and kicked the man in the kidney, pushing him out of the saddle onto the ground. Look out! The warning rang in Jack's ears, followed by two gunshots so close together they almost sounded as one. He wheeled the big stallion again toward the crash. The bee-like sound of a buzzing bullet whipped past him, close to the cheek. As he pulled Regret under control, he could see the third rider sitting on the ground, clutching his right shoulder, blood oozing between his fingers, his fallen pistol lying in the grass beside him. The young blonde-haired man who had shouted the warning to Jack stood over the man. His pistol was pointed inches from the man's face, smoke wisping from the warm barrel. Thanks, kid, Jack said, nudging Regret close beside him. If this was the kid he had been trailing, why would he have sided with him and prevent the man on the ground from shooting him in the back? Couldn't let him shoot you, the kid grinned. Lucky I was in time. Yes, lucky, Jack thought to himself. This kid is fast, quick thinker, and good with a gun. Not a man to cross. The fleeing crowd, realizing that the disturbance was already over, was starting to drift back, curiously watching the aftermath. The two men Jack had grounded were flailing about in the grass, trying to get up. A stocky, middle-aged man with a star on his vest was pulling the roped man to his feet, and two other townsmen were attending the other man. The mayor and the three men from the gazebo were hurrying across the grass toward Jack. The mayor was gushing with an oily smile. Thank you, stranger," his pudgy arm outstretched as he waddled forward. Jack swung out of the saddle, got his footing, and reached out to grasp the oncoming paw, which shook his enthusiastically. "It's a good thing you stepped in when you did, mister. It all happened so fast we didn't know what to do. The whole town is in your debt, sir." Then he added with gush, "Please tell us who you are, my good man." "The name's Clayton. Jack Clayton. Just passing through. Stopped to watch a while. When I saw the ruckus, I just sort of horned in." "Well, it's a good thing you did," the mayor repeated. "I didn't do it all myself," Jack said modestly. "This young man here saved my bacon. He kept that one." He pointed to the man on the ground, who was now being lifted to his feet by a citizen deputy, "from shooting me in the back." "And who are you, son?" the mayor asked, turning to the kid, offering his hand, which the young man conspicuously didn't take. The mayor pulled his hand back, rubbed his fingers together, and let it drop to his side. "I don't believe I've seen you around here before either." He prompted an answer to his original question. "Andy Fane," the kid said. "Heard about the competitions. Thought I might take a crack at some prize money." Jack noted the name, although it was not familiar to him. The kid was probably all right, he decided. "Good for you, boy. Hope you have luck." The mayor chuckled. Then, turning to Clayton, "Please excuse my manners, Mr. Clayton. I'm afraid I didn't introduce myself properly. I am Simon Kane, the mayor of Promise. These gentlemen with me," he waved his arm as if presenting them, "are Matt McCall." Jack already knew his face, although it appeared more cold up close, and the man stared at him with a questioning keenness of interest. He reached out and shook the man's bony hand. "Abner Blodgett, president of our local bank," the mayor continued. Blodgett was a little plump and graying at the temples, but appeared congenial. "And Rod Blake. He owns the Rafter Bee and is president of the local Cattlemen's Association." Blake stepped forward and offered his hand. He was a tall, angular man and moved with the air of confidence and authority. A bushy gray mustache spread across his narrow face. "Those men work for Hank Belden," Blake explained. "The one you roped is Rafe Carver. The other two are Pete Tanner and Herb Sharpton. Sharpton is the one your young friend here winged." "Who is this Belden you spoke of?" Jack asked. The Matson girl had accused Clayton of being one of his gunmen. "He's the biggest rancher in the area," Blake explained. "He's been dead set against this irrigation project. Doesn't belong to the Cattlemen's Association, even though he does have the biggest spread around. I did notice the range around here is a little dry. What's he got against the irrigation project? Water is good for everyone," Jack said. "That's the problem," Blake said. "He's got water, but he doesn't want anyone else to have any." "Where is he getting his water?" Jack asked. "The headwaters of Deer River are on Belden's Diamond B spread. He's dammed it up and lets only enough water through that we can afford to pay for. Between the lack of water and the rustling that's been going on here, we've all lost cattle, especially me," Blake continued. "And Belden's herd has been growing. It would be easy for him to turn a Rafter Bee into a Diamond Bee," Abner Blodgett interjected. "Now, Abner," Blake chastised, "we don't know that Belden's into rustling, and I won't accuse any man without proof." "You're too kind, Rod," the banker whined. "Just the same, I know what I know." Blake ignored him. "We decided that with irrigation, we could bring our water in from Lake Doria, and Belden could just sit on his infernal dam." "Are you aware," Jack said, "that it's illegal to dam up the river? You can have the government force him to open it up." "We've asked the government for help, but none has been forthcoming, so we decided to rely on ourselves," Blake said. As a government agent, Jack knew he could ride up to Belden's dam and have it opened up, but that was not what he was here for. Besides, he never liked to reveal his identity as a government man unless absolutely necessary. Perhaps, when he wrapped up his current business, he could request to be sent back here, or at least have another agent dispatched. He hated to turn away from trouble when he saw it, and he could see trouble brewing that could be erupting into a full-scale range war here. "Well, I guess you know what you were doing," Jack added with disinterest, which Matt McCall seemed to notice with a hint of skepticism hiding behind his forced smile. "Good luck to you with the project. Nice meeting you, gentlemen." He started to turn toward Regret. "You're not staying for the competitions?" the mayor asked. "There is prize money to be earned. Besides, the entrance fees go into the irrigation fund." We've already told you what a good cause it is. We've raised nearly $20,000 already. And I'm keeping it in my bank, Blodgett added proudly. Jack couldn't help but notice a hint of sudden interest cross Andy Fane's young face. Well, maybe I will stick around for a little while anyways, Clayton mused. I'll just wander around and see what might interest me. Fine, fine, Kane gushed. Again, let us thank you. No need, gentlemen. Good day. Jack tipped the brim of his black range hat, turned on his heel, and pulled the reins, turning Regret's head and urging him to follow him across the field toward the picket lines. He was thinking about the town's problems, about the man he was seeking, and about Andy Fane and the irrigation fund money as he strode across the field. Suddenly, his reverie was interrupted as the roar of wagon wheels and the pounding of hooves. Then it was upon him. He jumped back a step, pulling Regret with him, as a team of horses, pulling a buckboard, whizzed past him. The startled black horse reared and snorted, stamping a small circle in the dirt as Jack tried to restrain him. The buckboard had rushed by him, as if he wasn't even there. What Clayton oathed in surprise. Then, as he regained his bearings, he recognized the reckless driver. Blonde, curly hair flew straight back from her head in the rush of moving air created by the fast ride. The driver was the same girl who had driven him off the Matson range earlier that day, but now she was wearing a man's red and blue plaid cotton shirt and jeans. She still wore the same pistol belt about her trim waist. A brown range-style hat hung, by a strap, down her lithe back. Beside her, on the bench of the buckboard, was an elderly lady hanging tightly to the seat rails to maintain her balance as she swayed with the slewing wagon. A large black sombrero covered most of her graying, short-cropped hair and was tied in place by a strap cinched beneath her sagging chin. The years had added pounds to the lady, filling out her large white blouse and brown divided riding skirt. A magnificent sorrel stallion, tied behind the rig, trotted easily behind the speeding wagon. This must be Marcy Matson, Clayton thought, and this must be the horse Andy Fane had told him she would be racing. Jack knew this was a fast horse, for he had been trailing it for the better part of 2 days. He was positive this was the same horse that the blonde-haired young rider had ridden. He looked down at his feet and saw the same star-marked horseshoe prints that he had been following. Again, Jack wished he had paid more attention in Sand Flats. Could it be possible that the kid he had been pursuing was in fact a girl? Marcy Matson? Whether the girl had recognized Clayton and deliberately tried to run him down, Jack did not know, or perhaps she was just arrogant and reckless. Probably the latter, but quite possibly both. The girl had parked the buckboard in the area next to the picket lines and had hopped off the seat and was loosening the sorrel's tether by the time Jack reached the buckboard. The elderly lady was climbing down from the seat. "Let me help you, ma'am," Jack said in a low, pleasant drawl, and reaching up toward the woman. She threw him a scornful glance and waved a hand toward him with annoyance. "I'm not so old, young man, that I need a young whippersnapper to help me." She swung herself around to step down from the wagon, pushing her plump, round rump into his face. Jack stepped back a pace, a little chagrined and absent-mindedly touched the brim of his hat. "My apologies, ma'am," he muttered. The woman turned, threw Clayton a scornful glance, and pushed by him. "Jemp," she grunted. "You don't take a hint very easy, do you, mister?" Marcy Matson said, leading the sorrel next to him. "I told you once before today. We don't like Belden gun hawks around here." Her free right hand moved close to the pistol butt in its holster on her left side in a cross-draw position. "I told you before, miss," Jack said, a bit of a plea in his tone. "I am not one of this man, Belden's men." "You can believe that, ma'am," a voice from behind said. Andy Fane stepped forward. "This man just treed 3 of Belden's men and sent them packing off to jail." Marcy let her eyes stray slightly away from Clayton and saw the lanky cowboy step forward. He was smiling broadly in a roguish sort of way, and Marcy could not help but notice the man's clean-cut appearance and confident, if not somewhat cocky, air. She tried to keep her eyes cold and hard, but behind them was a sense of soft admiration for the young stranger. Then she flashed her dark eyes back to Clayton. Her hand relaxed a little from the gun butt. "He's right, ma'am," Jack drawled. "I did have a run-in with those boys. This fellow here," he indicated Andy, "is Andy Fane, saved me from one of them by putting a slug into the man's shoulder. My name is Jack Clayton. I'm just passing through. I don't know what is going on here, but it sure looks to me like you have good cause to be on the prod for this Belden, whoever he is. I assure you I have never met the man." "Well, now is your chance, young man," the older woman said. "Here he comes now, with Sheriff Hackett and his top gun, Burl Riker. That's his young whelp on the Appaloosa." Jack noticed a softening change in Marcy's eyes as she glanced at the approaching riders. She seemed to wince at the elder lady's remark about the younger Belden. The four riders reined up in front of them. "Kate, Marcy," the tall, lean man on a fine Equals-looking bay acknowledged. He looked very distinguished and dressed rather handsomely in frock coat, striped pants, and shiny high-stove-pipe military boots. His eyes were flinty gray and matched the handlebar mustache beneath his hawk-like nose and the shock of hair that appeared beneath his cavalry hat. To Belden's right, astride a rangy dun, was the plump man with the sheriff's star that Jack had seen earlier gathering up Belden's hellions. And next to him was a big, grubby, rough-looking man. Dark stubble covered his round, jowly cheeks, and his clothes were dirty and slovenly. A large black-handled Colt .44 rested on his right thigh, a little forward for quick access. His dark eyes were strange, piercing, but blank. To his right, a dark-haired young man atop a magnificent-looking Appaloosa stallion sat uneasily in the saddle. His blue eyes fixed, somewhat wistfully, on Marcy Matson. She averted her eyes and tried to conceal her interest, but Clayton noticed it, and so did Andy Fane. "We've got nothing to say to you, Hank Belden," the elderly lady said. "And I've got nothing to say to you either, Kate." He turned his attention to Jack. "This the man, Sheriff?" Belden asked sternly. "That's right, Mr. Belden," the sheriff answered meekly. "Now you listen to me, young man," Belden addressed Clayton. "I'm not saying my men didn't deserve what they got, but I take care of my own. From now on, mind your own business." Riker shifted in the saddle as if ready for action. Jack saw no reason to retaliate. He just stood there, staring the man in the face. To make a play now would be playing right into Belden's and Riker's hands. Belden, expecting trouble and getting none, seemed a bit flustered, then turned to his son. "Come on, Steve. We'd better get you registered for the race." He started to swing his horse around. "Good luck, Marcy," the boy said, a hint of longing in his eyes, as he turned the Appaloosa away. Marcy stared after him. "He's racing that big Appaloosa against you, is he?" Andy Fane broke the silence. "Yes," Marcy answered softly. "That's buckshot," Kate Matson interjected. "Belden thinks he can give Sunrise," she indicated the sorrel, "a run. Normally he wouldn't do anything to support the irrigation fundraising, but he's got to be top dog at everything around here." "Then we've got a good three-way race going here," Andy said enthusiastically. "Three-way?" Marcy said with a start. "Sure, Belden's horse, yours and Jack's." Marcy and Kate simultaneously turned their attention to Regret. They both knew horses and could see immediately that here was a real contender. Jack could see a look of worry and apprehension on both of their faces. "Now wait a minute, Andy," Jack retorted. "I never agreed to entering the race." "Aw, but Jack," Fane pleaded, "you can beat both of those horses. You just gotta." Before Jack could protest further, Marcy warned, trying to hide her worry. "Forget it, mister. That nag of yours could never come close to Sunrise." Take my advice and save your $20 entrance fee. Stay out of it." She tossed her head haughtily, spun on her heel, pulling the sorrel behind her. "Come on, Ma," she said as she strode away. "So long, Sonny," Kate said as she followed after her daughter. Jack watched them walk away. He smiled wryly and said to Andy Fane, "I guess that young lady needs to be taught a lesson. We'd better get registered for the race." Chapter 6. Horse Race. The heat of the day had peaked somewhat by 2 o'clock. The sky was crystal clear blue, not a cloud appearing. Only the blazing sun and the silhouette of Dr. Deke's hot air balloon graced the magnificent New Mexico sky. Riders and their horses had gathered at the starting line for the afternoon race. A broad white ribbon had been tied to a pole at the inside portion of the makeshift track. This ribbon would be held horse chest high by an attendant on the far outside of the track. Once the starter fired off the beginning shot, the ribbon would be dropped for the horse's exit. Flags on poles 4 feet high had been planted along the track on both sides at varying intervals. The horses would have to stay between these rows of flags. The course was laid out to extend a 1/4 mile southward and wind around a large grove of cottonwood trees, where the race would not be visible until the horses emerged on the other side and returned toward the finish line back where they started. 10 riders and horses had already claimed their places along the starting line when Marcy Matson atop Sunrise guided the big sorrel to the starting line. She glanced to her left at the line of horses and gritted her teeth with anger. She had been delayed by Clayton and was too late for a favorable position. She was in number 11th place, while Steve Belden on Buckshot had landed a number 6 spot in the middle. Oh well, she told herself. She could pull Sunrise out ahead of the pack and eventually move to the inside. She could still beat that hay burner of Belden's, she told herself somewhat unconvincingly. The last entry arrived and pulled into the number 12 position on the far outside. "Looks like we were both a little late," Jack Clayton mused as he settled regret at the line. A frown of concern creased Clayton's face as he noticed the riders in the 1 and 2 slots as Belden's men, Carver and Tanner. Why weren't these men in jail where they belonged? Obviously, Sheriff Hackett had given in to Hank Belden and let them go. Jack decided he would pay a visit to the sheriff as soon as this race was over. "Yeah, we'll see who's late," Marcy shouted as the starting pistol went off. The ribbon dropped, and the line of horses shot forward, Regret and Sunrise lurching forward in a simultaneous stride. The crowd roared with excitement. Spectator hats and hand-held flags waved the contestants forward as the flying hooves tore the grassy turf, flinging clods of sod and dirt in all directions. At first, the line of horses seemed to be running together, but it only took seconds for a pattern to emerge, and the line became almost wedge-shaped, except for the 1 and 2 horses, with Steve Belden's Buckshot in the lead at center. Carver and Tanner had jumped the gun and put their mounts out a hair before the starting gun actually fired. Marcy Manson gave Sunrise his head and urged him onward, distorting the wedge-like formation even more at the far end of the line. She glanced to her right to see Clayton leaning low over Regret's neck, standing in the stirrups and beginning to edge past her. She whipped her reins rapidly against the sorrel's flanks and urged him on. As the racers neared the first turn before the cottonwoods, Buckshot was clearly in the lead, moving toward the inside. Sunrise and Regret were almost neck and neck, with Sunrise pulling forward as Marcy maneuvered him closer to the center, with Regret close behind. One by one, the horses disappeared behind the grove of trees. Buckshot was first, now on the inside. The number 2 horse was now in second place, having moved a little away from the inside, just behind and to the outside of Buckshot. The 1 horse still trailed along the inside. Marcy sent Sunrise forward with a new burst of speed after the 2 horse and Buckshot. The great horse reached his powerful legs out in tremendous strides, his chest muscles flexing with golden grace, and his flowing white tail streaming in the breeze, passing the two horse on the outside and moving in closer behind Buckshot. The two horses moved a little more to the outside. Clayton urged Regret forward, letting him have his head and taking a liberty run. Stride after stride, the gallant black pushed forward, increasing the distance between him and the rest of the horses behind as he too passed the two horse on the outside. Marcy had moved closer to Steve Belden, whose Appaloosa seemed to be tiring. Regret shot forward, gaining on Buckshot and pulling slightly ahead of Marcy and Sunrise. They were now nearing the far turn of the race, about to emerge from behind the stand of trees. Belden whipped Buckshot into a new burst of speed, pushing the steed to the limit of his stamina, and emerged from the trees still in the lead on the inside. Clayton was half a length behind on the outside, and Sunrise was desperately trying to make a move to pass Buckshot on the outside. But the two horse had moved in close to her right, and the one horse had moved in close behind her. They had her trapped in a pocket. She couldn't get out. Meanwhile, Clayton had edged Regret into the lead, half a neck ahead of Belden's Appaloosa, unaware that Marcy had been sabotaged. Marcy pushed Sunrise into Tanner's number 2 horse and shouted, "Let me through! Move over! I'm coming through!" Tanner pulled his horse closer and rammed the big sorrel. Sunrise half stumbled. Marcy's right hand reached out and slapped Tanner's beard, stubbled face. "Move away!" she shouted again. They were halfway back toward the finish line, and Regret was now a half length ahead of Buckshot when he heard the girl's screams behind him. Glancing back for a brief second, he saw the Matson girl's plight. Without a thought for the race, Jack pulled back on the reins, and Regret began to slow. The big black stallion appeared to be standing still as the Appaloosa pulled forward and the following horses caught up to him. Then he was beside Tanner on the outside. "I've had enough of you boys today," he shouted as he banged the big black into the two horse, reaching out with his left and grabbing Tanner by the back of his collar and pulling him backward out of the saddle. Tanner landed with a thud in the churned sod and rolled to a half-sitting position, his arms up and covering his fear-stricken face as the trailing horses thundered around and past him without hitting him. Clayton fell back a little farther and rammed into Carver's number 1 horse and pushed the rider off the saddle, rolling to the side of the track. Meanwhile, seeing the pocket broken, Marcy urged Sunrise forward with a tremendous burst of speed. Buckshot, flecked with lather, was slowing, having been played out. As the riders crossed the finish line, it was Sunrise by a length. Buckshot, heaving and blowing, struggled home in second place, with Regret and Clayton a close third. Chapter 7. Gun for hire. Marcy let the big sorrel slow and brought him to a halt several yards beyond the finish line. She leaned over and patted the Sunrise's sweaty neck. "Good fella," she whispered in his ear. "I knew you wouldn't let me down." Then she swung from the saddle and loosened the girth, letting him relax for a few minutes. Sunrise whinnied and blew as his heaving body expanded and constricted with each massive breath. As Sunrise began to cool down, Marcy pulled on the reins, turning the sorrel around to look back toward the finish line. Steve Belden was still astride Buckshot, and the lathered animal was heaving for breath. A darkness crossed Marcy's face as she strode up to him. "I always knew you'd do whatever your daddy told you to do, but I never thought you'd stoop this low," she said angrily, a hint of sob in her voice. "But Marcy," Steve tried to explain, "I had nothing to do, why—" "Save it," she almost growled between clenched teeth. "Just forget there was ever anything," she cut off, flashed her eyes angrily and added, "Get off and give that horse a break. You don't even know how to treat an animal." She tugged on Sunrise's reins and stepped past him. But Marcy," he tried to plead, then watched her go. Away. Jack Clayton had already found some shade for regret and had stripped the saddle and martingale from the stallion's back and chest. He was rubbing him down with tufts of grass as Marcy approached. He busied himself, keeping his back toward her, and pretended he didn't know she was there. She came to a halt behind him, watched him work for a moment, then tried to speak. There was a lump in her throat. Apologies did not come easy from Marcy Matson. "Mr. Clayton?" she said meekly. Jack stopped the rubbing a moment. Then, saying nothing, he continued his work. I want to thank you." Her voice trembled weakly. Jack turned to face her. A slight smile began. "No thanks needed, ma'am," he said quietly. She flushed. "I'm sorry you lost the race." Jack shrugged. "I really didn't want to race anyway. I am sorry for Andy Fane, though." "Andy Fane?" "Yes, he was betting on regret. Probably lost a bunch of money. But I guess he'll get over it." "He's a good friend of yours?" she asked. Jack had noticed her interest in the young man earlier. "Just met him today," Jack answered. "He did save my hide from one of Belden's men." "The Beldens are ruthless, mean men," Marcy said. "Even the young one?" Jack queried. "Especially the young one," she flashed with anger. "Never had the nerve to stand up to his old man. No matter what Steve really wanted, he would walk away from it rather than go against his daddy." "What did he want?" Jack asked coolly, then supplying the answer. "You." Marcy started at that. My God, was it that obvious that a stranger could see it? She thought a moment, then supplied, "No, I don't think so, not really. If he did, nothing should stop him." Yeah. She blushed. "I suppose you're right, ma'am," Jack agreed. "I'm sorry." "You needn't be," she said with a touch of melancholia. Then she changed the topic. "Anyways, Mr. Clayton," she said, "I'm sorry for the way I treated you today, but Belden's been bringing in hired guns, and naturally." "You thought I was a gunman," he finished for her. "Well, you do wear that gun like you know what to do with it." "Maybe, just a little too well," Jack said. "Maybe you should follow Belden's lead and hire your own guns." "You looking for that kind of job, are you?" she queried with slight suspicion. Clayton shrugged. "Maybe so, maybe no. I'm just passing through, but if I do stay around a while, I just might be interested. Just what does this Belden have against you?" "It's not just us. It's everyone in the valley. Hank Belden is just a mean, bitter, and lonely old man, and he's taking it out on everyone else. Lord knows he's got enough land and money. Why should he want everyone else's unless it's just for spite? He used to be a decent man. Our families were always close. Hank Belden and my father were best of friends in their younger days. They settled in this valley together and worked side by side, building up each other's spread. Steve and I practically grew up together, and we thought we sort of had an understanding. What happened to change things? I'm not really sure, but after they both started their own families, I guess they started to grow away from each other. My mother seems to know more about it than I do, but she's never really talked about it much. Then, 4 years ago, Hank's wife died. He took it awfully hard, and the relationship with my father seemed to grow worse. Both of them became bitter toward each other, and they started to do things to each other, like cutting fences, running off stock, and cutting off water supply. Since Belden had the headwaters to the river, he built the dam and started charging high fees to my father. After a while, he was charging everyone in the valley. He became hated by all of his neighbors, and as he lost his remaining friends, he seemed to become meaner and more ruthless. Like he was trying to get even with the world. Did anyone try to retaliate? Yes, my father led the rest of the ranchers against him, but unfortunately the stress was too much for him. One time he confronted Belden at the dam and tried to open the gates. There was shooting, and my father was killed by Riker. The judge ruled it justifiable homicide, and Hank Belden was allowed to go free. My mother has never forgiven him, and they hate each other like poison. Clayton began to wonder if there was more to it. Perhaps there was something stronger between Hank Belden and Kate Matson. One thing was sure. Big trouble was brewing in this country. More trouble than he was here for. But the fact was that Marcy Matson Sorrell had been involved in the bank robbery at Sand Flats. Somehow she was involved, if not in all actuality, with the blonde rider he had been pursuing. Working for the Matsons could provide a good excuse to get close to her. Sounds like you have big troubles here, ma'am. On second thought, maybe I would like to hire my gun out to you. She flashed back sharply. Wait a minute here. I didn't say I wanted any hired guns. That was your idea. I'm not so sure that's the kind of thing I want. Then she settled down and changed the subject. I've got to go now, she said quietly. The mayor's probably waiting for me to award my prize. With that, she turned on her heel and led the big sorrel away toward the gazebo, where the crowd and dignitaries has reassembled after the foray of Belden's men. An interesting girl, Jack thought as he watched her walk away. It would be hard to believe she was the rider he had been following. But she was tough and determined. He couldn't rule out the possibility. As he watched her go, he noticed Sheriff Hackett at the rear of the crowd. He was standing there casually, watching, thumbs hooked in his belt, chewing on a cud of tobacco. Clayton remembered he had some unfinished business with Sheriff Hackett. Patting Regret's sleek neck, Jack said, "Just stand here a while, old son. I'll be right back. Don't wander off." The big black shook his head and whinnied as if he understood. Leaving Regret standing in the shade, Clayton swaggered toward the sheriff. He was almost upon him when Hackett noticed his approach out of the corner of his eye. He half spun around with a start. A look of apprehension was on his face. "Sheriff Hackett," Clayton greeted with an edge in his tone. "I need to talk to you." Hackett stood his ground, waited for Jack to halt close to him, standing face to face. "Yeah? What about?" He tried to cover a fluster in his voice with gruffness. "Belden's men. You didn't lock them up. You in tight with Belden, are you?" "No, I'm not in tight with Belden, if that's any of your business, which it ain't. You walk up to me with an attitude like that could get you in a lot of trouble, boy. Look, you're just passing through, so why don't you just saddle up and ride out?" Hackett bellowed. "Just give me some answers, Sheriff, and maybe I will." "I'm not giving you anything." "Look, Sheriff," Jack said with a little more tact, "I just want to know why you didn't lock those men up. If it's any of your business, just look around. We've got a lot of people from all over here, and there is a lot of riff-raff among them. I'll have you know, my jail is all full up. I don't have room for any more. I told Belden to keep his men in line. That's all I can do. If you think I'm giving Belden's men special treatment, I'm not. I didn't lock up Ted Matson either. He's been a terror at the Blue Ox. Made a mess of Casey's place. Lord knows he deserves a lockup too. I've told Kate to hold her boy down. Ted Matson, Kate's boy, must be Marcy's brother. Jack hadn't known about him. Marcy hadn't mentioned him. Jack let this new information seep into his brain. If he bore any resemblance to his sister, maybe he should get a look at this Ted Matson. I'm sorry I was so abrupt with you, Sheriff. Please accept my apologies if I seemed accusing, Jack said in a low, pleasant drawl, but Hackett interrupted him sharply. "Save it, mister," Hackett hissed between clenched teeth. Then he blurted, "Get the hell out of my town." He whirled and stalked off. Chapter 8. The Kid. Main Street was still crowded with throngs of people as Jack Clayton walked down the thoroughfare leading his black horse. After his talk with Sheriff Hackett, he had returned to Regret, saddled him, and headed back into town, hoping to find Ted Matson at the Blue Ox Saloon. He had stopped off at the nearest horse trough to give his friend a much-needed drink after the strenuous race in the hot afternoon sun, and then continued on into the center of town. As he approached the Blue Ox, he could see Kate Matson, Marcy Matson, and Andy Fane emerging from the saloon, climb into their buckboard with the sorrel and another brown horse tied behind it, and drove away. Andy Fane? At least he thought it was Andy. This man was dressed the same, but possibly Ted Matson might just look enough like Fane to be mistaken for him. After all, Clayton had not been certain that Fane was not the man he had been following. He certainly looked much like him. More than ever now, Jack needed to see what Ted Matson looked like. If he found him still in the Blue Ox, he would know it really was Andy Fane that had left town with the Matsons. But why would Andy Fane be with them? Was he just a fast worker? If Ted Matson was not still in the saloon, Clayton would have to ride out after the buckboard. He would use the pretense that he still wanted a job. There was no room to tie up at any of the hitch rails near the saloon, so Jack tied Regret to a rail in front of the hardware store and continued on along the board sidewalk, his heels clacking against the wood. When he reached the Blue Ox, he paused a little to the side of the batwing doors to peer inside without being struck by the swinging doors if someone were to come through. It was noisier inside than it was at the street, if that could be possible. The sweaty odors of unwashed men and the sour smell of spilled liquor filled his nostrils. Faint strains of a tinny piano occasionally rose above the din of boisterous shouts and laughter. Clayton had to strain his eyes to peer into the gloom inside, in striking contrast to the bright sunlight outside. A thick fog of smoke and dust enshrouded the entire scene. Gradually, as Clayton's eyes became accustomed to the darkness, he could make out the features of the people inside. Carefully and methodically, his eyes roamed around the room, checking out each and every person, looking for someone who might be Ted Matson. One by one, he eliminated them until his eyes came to rest on a young blonde-haired man at a poker table in the far corner. The man was slouched back in his chair, hat pushed back on his head, and holding 5 cards in his hand close to the vest. A half-burned cigarette dangled loosely from his mocking lips. A short pile of chips were stacked in front of him, and a considerable pot sat in the middle of the table. 3 other men were in the game, but the black-frocked man in the opposite chair definitely held most of the chips. The young man certainly bore a resemblance to Andy Fane. Same height, build, and coloring, but his attitude was entirely different. They really didn't look alike in any other way, but Jack could see enough resemblance that he was justified in mistaking Andy Fane for the man he was trailing. But now, there was no mistake. The man he now saw, he was sure, was the same one he had seen in Sand Flats and had since been pursuing. And he was probably Ted Matson. Clayton stepped inside and strode toward the table. "Hell, that's not luck you got, dude," Clayton heard the kid say as he stepped up behind him and hooked his thumbs in his gun belt, watching. "You got cheating skills. That's what you got." The gambler didn't look up. He merely pulled the pot into his pile. He'd been called a cheat before, and would be called so again, as long as he would not let himself be goaded into gunplay. He just ignored the kid. Frustration burned in the kid's eyes. His cigarette dropped from his lips as the kid stood up, crouched over the table. "You hear what I said, cheat?" the kid growled. The gambler still ignored him, stacking his chips. "Well, do you?" Matson repeated. Still no answer, no indication that the gambler acknowledged him at all. The kid straightened, his right hand splayed out close to the butt of his pistol. "He heard you, Sonny." Clayton's calm, slow drawl from behind echoed like a warning of impending disaster in the kid's ears. "And so did I." The kid froze in place. His blue eyes shifted warily from side to side, processing what was happening. He felt he was being called out. A thin smile began to creep across his face, trying to hide the cold fear that was suddenly welling up inside of him. He turned slowly to face the G-Man. Color drained from his face as he turned to face Jack Clayton. Recognition was in the kid's eyes, but he forced a smirk. He had seen Clayton clear enough before to know he was here after him. Bluff it all the way, he told himself, but knew he was never really any good at it. That was why he could never win this stupid game. But what the hell, he had to try. "I wasn't talking to you, mister," the kid said. "I don't give a damn what you heard." But if you want a little of this action, you can have it." The kid played it tough to the hilt. "But I'm talking to you, Sonny." Ice in Clayton's voice. "Don't call me Sonny," the kid shouted. "So what do I call you? Matson? Ted Matson." The kid flustered. The gambler put in nonchalantly, "That's his name, mister." The kid whirled back, drawing his Colt at the same time. Before Jack could stop him, Matson's pistol was already out and pointing at the gambler's face only inches away. The kid's hand shook uncontrollably. Fear was in his eyes, and sweat was streaming down his face. However reckless the kid may be, Clayton was almost sure that this kid was not a killer at heart. Almost sure. He was going to gamble with the gambler's life. He stepped forward, reaching from behind, wrapping his left arm around the kid's chest, grabbing him tightly, simultaneously pressing the hard steel of his Colt's muzzle against the boy's temple. "Now hold it right there, son," Jack said quietly and calmly. The kid froze, startled with surprise. "You shoot that tin horn, and I'll just have to shoot you. Comprende?" Jack pushed the muzzle harder against the boy's blonde temple. "And I wouldn't want to do that. Your mother and sister wouldn't like that very much, and I happen to like them. You should have thought about them before you got yourself into trouble." The kid's eyes flashed back and forth as he tried to absorb what was happening to him. Instinct or fear forced him to nod his head affirmatively. "Now, very slowly raise that pistol high enough for me to reach it. Careful now. Don't let it go off, whatever you do. Don't let it go off," Jack said. The kid's arm was still shaking. The menacing gun barrel waved back and forth and up and down. The gambler was still frozen in place, his arms lying flat on the table, and his hands were pressed against the felt to control his tremble, his big black eyes looking up from under his bushy brows that now gleamed with sweat. His gaunt face was ashen, the blood having drained in fear. "Do as I say," Clayton repeated the warning. The kid had not made a move. "Now," Jack eared the hammer back. It clicked its deadly message. The kid started to raise his pistol, slowly. When it had reached shoulder level, Clayton released his grasp around the boy's chest and pulled the gun free of the kid's hand, stepped back and pulled the boy around to face him. Tension seemed to break in a loud burst. The gambler relaxed quickly, letting his face fall on his arms on the table. The relief was overwhelming. The room, which had gone silent during this episode, resumed its usual cacophony, and the patrons went back to their drinking, gambling, and general carousing. "I suppose you remember me?" Clayton said, his gun now at waist level covering young Matson. The kid didn't answer. "Let's go." The G-man waved his gun barrel toward the doors. Clayton was well aware of the onlookers as he ushered Ted Matson across the floor to the Batwings. He was particularly aware that 3 men at the bar looked on with keen interest. Belden's hired guns, Burl Riker, Rafe Carver, and Pete Tanner. Once outside, Jack led his captive down the board sidewalk to where he had left Regret. Keeping his pistol aimed at young Matson, he untied the reins, swung into the saddle, and said, "Where's your horse?" "What for?" the kid asked with surprise. "Aren't you taking me to jail?" "Not yet. I'm taking you home first. Now, where's your horse?" "It's the bay at the center of the hitch rack in front of the Blue Ox." Burl Riker peered over the Batwings, watching the G-man and his prisoner ride out of town heading north. Taking the young whelp home, he thought to himself. A wry grin spread across his dark stubbled face. Further down the street, a dark, lanky man stood in the shade of the hotel's false front. A stranger to town as many were this week, he was hardly noticeable in the crowd of milling pedestrians as he too watched the pair of riders pass by. He smiled to himself, flicked his almost finished cigarette into the dusty street, and stepped on it as he strode to his waiting horse, swung into the saddle, and rode out after them. Chapter 9. Return of a Bad Man. Clayton and Ted Matson had ridden steadily and silently for about a mile, with the G-Man riding close on the left side and a little to the rear of Matson, when Clayton ordered Matson to rein up. "Now what?" the kid asked. "We're being followed," Jack said, scanning their back trail. "I don't see nobody," Matson scoffed. "That's the problem," Clayton mused. "Neither do I." Then, taking up the reins, "Let's go," and urged Regret forward, motioning the kid on. "Loco gent," Matson thought to himself and rode on. Back down the trail, the dark young rider had pulled up and guided his mount behind some bushes for cover, fully aware that the G-Man had detected a possible tail. Seeing his quarry ride on as the trail wound westward, he reasoned that if he cut across country toward the high country, he could come out ahead of them as they followed the trail, and he could remain undetected. As Clayton and Ted Matson rode on, the man guided his pony out of the brush and gigged him forward into a gallop. 20 minutes later, Clayton and the kid rounded a bend in the trail. They didn't see the dark figure couching in the brush alongside the road until it was almost too late. A meager glint of sunlight on the gunmetal barrel of a rifle protruding from the foliage was almost not enough warning to react. The CR AIC of the rifle, belching flame and smoke, broke the stillness of the late afternoon. A bullet whizzed through the crown of Clayton's black range hat, lifting it and flinging it back to hang down between his shoulders by the loosely tightened chin strap. Regret reared, came back down, and thrashed about. Jack was reaching for his gun as the black settled. Ted Matson fought to bring the bay under control. "Hold it right there," a voice from the bush ordered. "I missed that time, but I won't again." Jack let his pistol slide back into his holster and raised his hands, still holding the reins. "Both of you," the man ordered. "Keep your hands up." He stepped out from behind the bush into the trail. He kept his rifle steady. "Blackie Darrow," the kid gasped. "That's right, kid." Darrow stepped closer. A bandage showed across his forehead beneath his battered hat. "I figured I left you for dead back down the trail," Clayton drawled. "Guess you figured wrong, G-Man." Then to Ted, "Good to see you again, kid. I think you have something for me." Yeah, the kid stammered nervously. "I got your share waiting for you." "Share? Oh no, kid. No share. It's all mine." But we're partners, right?" Matson still was no good at bluffing. "Wrong? You broke up our partnership when you ran out on me? You stole my money, boy, and I don't like that." Darrow's words were slow and deliberate and cold as ice. "So, where's the money, boy?" I'll get it for you, don't worry." "I'm not the one that's worried, kid. Just tell me where it is and I'll go get it. I can't really describe it. I'll have to show you." Matson stalled for time, eyeing the muzzle of the rifle. "You afraid? I'll shoot you if you tell me," Blackie chided. "Hell, you're my friend, aren't you? Besides, I want to see the dough first. Suppose I blow you away before I find out that you lied. No, you're staying with me until I get it." "Now, kid." Blackie shifted the rifle slightly to the left, pointing more directly at Clayton. "Kick your nag away from the government man so I can get a clear shot." Then to Clayton, "You never should have meddled in this, mister, and now your meddling days are over." He raised the rifle and eared back the hammer. Jack readied himself. If this was going to be his last, he would go down fighting. He swallowed hard and gritted his teeth. Darrow chuckled to himself as he brought the weapon to full height. His finger whitened as he pulled the trigger back, taking up the slack. It all happened fast, almost a blur, but to Blackie and Clayton, it was as if time was non-existent and everything played out in slow motion. Clayton threw himself from the saddle, drawing his Colt at the same time, firing without aim. Blackie increased pressure on the trigger, and the weapon boomed, the lead projectile slicing the space where Clayton had been sitting in the saddle. He quickly jacked around into the chamber and fired again as Clayton rolled out from under Regret's dancing hoofs. Dirt sprayed into his face where Darrow's bullet plowed into the ground just inches from him. Darrow had hurried his shot and missed as a distraction from down the trail interrupted him. 3 riders came thundering around the bend in the trail. Blackie instinctively whirled, firing wildly in their direction. The 3 riders separated and spread apart, bringing their Colts into play and returning fire. Blackie's attention was now split between the interlopers and Clayton. "Better get the hell out of here." He fired wildly at the riders, then back to Clayton and missed. Clayton had rolled to a half-sitting position and fired hastily at Darrow, who was now turning and running back into the brush. Again, his shot went wild. In the same instant, Ted Matson, seeing an opportunity for escape, took it. He kicked the bay forward, hoofs churning the trail bed and spraying the G-Man with dust. Jack raised his pistol to fire again at Darrow, but the kid had now ridden into the line of fire, shielding the fleeing outlaw. Jack held his fire. Then, seeing Darrow had disappeared into the bush, he eased back on the hammer of his revolver. He then looked down the trail to see Ted Matson and his bay disappearing around the next bend. The kid would have to wait. He could still get Darrow. He pushed himself to his feet and started to run toward the bushes to pursue him. He had forgotten about the riders who had conveniently ridden into the fray. He had gone 3 or 4 strides when his memory was refreshed with the reality of their presence. A pistol cracked and dust flew up in front of Clayton's boots as a bullet plowed into the earth. "Hold it right there, Clayton." A heavy, deep voice sounded. "One more step and it'll be your last." Jack's shoulders slouched in defeat. He raised his hands above his head and let his pistol dangle by the trigger guard on his finger. Darrow's gone. Matson's gone. Jack sighed and turned slowly to see his captors. He should have seen this coming, he told himself as he took in the sight of the 3 riders. They had ridden close to him now, separated into a semicircle around him, their guns trained on him. The mirthful glee of victory was in the menacing eyes of Hank Belden's gunmen, Burl Riker, Rafe Carver, and Pete Tanner. "Thanks for the help," Jack said flippantly. "Help?" Riker said. "We didn't come here to help you. Hell, we came here to kill you. Now toss that iron." Jack let the pistol slip from his fingers. It thudded into the dust. "A little drastic over a couple of skirmishes and a race, isn't it?" Jack said. "My boys don't like being pushed around by no-account drifters, or any other galoots for that matter." "Let me have the honors, Burl," Rafe Carver put in. "Well, what about me?" Tanner interjected. "Those horses like to chop me to bits when he tossed me in front of them. Seems like I should have a crack at him, too." "Tell you what, boys," Riker said. "I'll let you soften him up first." He grinned first at Clayton, then back to his men. They took his meaning and slowly dismounted. Jack watched silently as they approached. He would not beg. He would not show fear. But as these 2 miscreants came at him, he knew he was in for a beating. Chapter 10. Prisoner in the Dark. Blackness, complete darkness. Was that all it was after all? No heaven, no hell, just eternal darkness. Was this the dreaded death? No hope? No salvation? Just blackness and emptiness? No, that couldn't be. He wouldn't let it be. His eyes were open, but he saw nothing, only darkness. Then, as realization seeped into his brain, the G-Man felt the pain in his midsection and the throb of his aching head and torture of back pain. He felt the thickness of his swollen lips. His hands and feet were numb, and he couldn't move them. No, this was not death. He was alive. Alive to feel pain and torment. He now knew he was not dead. He remembered Carver and Tanner taking turns holding him while the other pounded him. He could remember Riker's bellowing laugh. He remembered the excruciating pain of the blows before sinking into nothingness. Now, as he began to regain consciousness, he remembered the pain, and it was still with him, but subsiding to numbness. He finally figured out that his hands were tied behind his back and his ankles were tied. He was lying face down on a wooden floor. His cheek could feel the splintering roughness of the floorboards. The smell of mildew filled his nostrils, and the dusty air was hot and consuming. Sweat trickled off his brows into his swollen eyes. He felt a movement as something crawled next to him, then scurried away across the dark floor. As he lay there, trying to bring his senses back to full awareness, his eyes began to gradually become accustomed to the dark. Moment by throbbing moment, he lay there, concentrating on his surroundings. Eventually, the darkness seemed to become less black, and he could see shapes of objects on the floor around him. A dark little splotch moved hurriedly along a wall. The squeak of a mouse. From beyond a door-like shadow, he could hear the muted sounds of voices. Finally, the G-Man was fully awake. He knew now he had been tied and left in a back room of some old shack. He was sure he was locked in, even though he was tied and couldn't escape anyway. Belden's men had beat him to a pulp and then brought here. Why had they not killed him when they said they were going to? They were either trying to frighten him or they had a use for him. Probably the latter. He struggled to a sitting position and worked at the rawhide strips that bound his hands, trying to pull them free. No use. The rawhide merely cut into his wrists. He could feel the wetness of fresh blood. He relaxed, waited in the darkness, trying to think of a way out. Nothing. He could think of nothing. He sat silent, only the babble from the other side of the door breaking the stillness of his prison. With his knees bent and feet on the floor, he kicked them forward and then followed with his butt, inching across the rough floor toward the dark rectangle that appeared to be a closed door. Time and again, he kicked out and moved forward until he was close to the door. He pressed his ear against it and listened. The babble became clearer now, and as he concentrated, he began to make out the words. "We should have killed him right then and there," a voice said. Sounded like Riker. "The boss has a plan for him," another voice said. It sounded familiar, but Jack couldn't place it. "But don't worry," the voice continued. "When a government man is found dead at Belden's dam site, old Hank will find he's in bigger trouble than he ever planned on." So that was it. Clayton had been recognized by someone as a government man. Whoever it was had probably thought he was here to open the dam. And whoever it was had something against Hank Belden. He was going to be blamed for Clayton's death on his premises. But why? Wasn't Belden causing all the trouble around here? Or was he? Perhaps Belden was being duped all along. Perhaps another party had reason to pit Belden against all the other ranchers and create ill will. But why? Clayton had stumbled into something big. There was a plot here, getting in his way, keeping him from the task he was here for. He had wanted no part of the trouble here, but he had been sucked into it now. "It won't be long now," the familiar voice said. "Tanner's gone for the sheriff. He'll tell him there's a government man up here trying to open the dam and Belden is shooting it out with him. By the time they get here, Clayton will be lying dead by the dam." There was laughter. Riker's voice echoing above the others. Who else was there? How many were holding him captive? He knew Tanner was gone, but what about Carver? His question was immediately answered when he heard the familiar voice say, "Might as well get it over with. All right, Carver, get our boy out of there." Jack heard boot steps crossing the wooden floor, coming toward the door. He quickly scooted back away from the door and resumed his prone position, his face turned toward the door. He heard the lock rasp and the door opened. Light filtered into the room from behind Carver, silhouetting his lanky body in the doorway. "Comfy?" Carver chided, expecting no answer, as he came forward, leaned down and cut the bonds around Clayton's ankle. "Your troubles will soon be over," he chuckled as he roughly pulled the G-Man to his feet. Clayton's knees sagged. The numbness from the tied ankles was still there. He couldn't feel his feet. Ah, poor fella, can't stand up. He grabbed Clayton under his arms and dragged him across the floor, his toes dragging on the rough boards. There was no fight in the government man. He endured the handling. Feeling was beginning to creep back into his ankles now, but he wouldn't let Carver know that. As Carver dragged him into the other room, Jack could see that nighttime must have come, for there was darkness outside the shack's open door, and a globe lantern was lit, sitting in the center of a table in the middle of the room, casting dark shadows in the corners. There was a half bottle of whiskey next to it. As he was being dragged into the room, he caught a glimpse of Burl Riker in the lantern light. The other man was in shadow and remained featureless. Jack's body slumped to the floor as Carver loosened his hold and let him drop heavily. Had trouble walking, Carver laughed. Heavy galoot, I wouldn't want to carry him far. Legs are probably numb from the rawhide, the shadowed man said as he cut the rope around Clayton's feet. His circulation should be coming back soon. Try getting him on his feet again. Carver heaved a sigh of consternation, then caught Clayton's shirt collar and heaved the G-man to his feet. Jack's knees seemed to sag again, but he caught himself by leaning into the table, stumbling halfway around, his back to the table, and steadying his tied hands against the tabletop. He held himself up on his feet. Just a minute, Jack panted with exertion. Let me just... His words trailed off as he suddenly went into action. His strength had already returned more than his captors had suspected. With a sudden heave, he upended the table. Lantern and whiskey bottle crashed to the floor, shattering. The whiskey streamed across the floorboards, and the flame from the broken lantern whooshed into a blazing fire. At the same time, head down, body bent at the waist, the G-man plowed into Carver's midsection, battering him with his head. The gunslick fell backwards, and Jack jumped over his body, sprinted forward, crashing into the shadowed man with his shoulder, sending him sprawling sideways to the floor. What the hell? Was Riker's surprise. He clawed for his six-shooter, but flame flashed up in front of him, half blinding him as Clayton darted through the open door. Stop him, you fools, the shadowed man shouted. The fire, Riker answered. To hell with the fire. Just get him. Without taking time to get his bearings, the G-man just ran. Just as fast as he could, but his hands tied behind him was slowing him down, and he had no idea where he was running to. Only away from his captors. In the light of the full moon, Riker and Carver could see the running man heading for a stand of trees. They both fired and missed as Clayton zigzagged away, then took up pursuit, running and firing occasionally until the government man disappeared into the foliage. Behind them, the shack was fully ablaze, the flickering flames lighting the area brightly. Jack moved deeper into the stand of trees and found a hiding place in a hollow at the foot of a big cottonwood. In the darkness, it would be difficult for the gunmen to find him readily unless they were extremely lucky. He needed to rest, get back more of strength. If he could only find a sharp stone to work at the rawhide strips. He groped around the area where he lay, his fingers passing over dried leaves, bark, and stones until he found one with an edge. Not much of one, but it would have to do. He went to work, furiously rubbing the edge against the strips that bound him. It was slow going, and he could hear the gunmen thrashing about the woods, heading in his direction. Better find another hiding place. Keeping the stone in his palm, he pushed to his feet and began to run, but crashing through the brush made enough noise to attract his pursuers. There he goes, Riker shouted, then fired. The bullet chipped the bark of a tree as Clayton dashed beyond it. The race was on again. Clayton could see he was entering the far edge of the woods. He could see moonlight streaming in. He would soon be out of the grove and could run faster on open ground. Clayton's hopes of running faster across open ground were dashed as he emerged from the trees. Jack found himself on a high table ledge overlooking a deep gorge, with no place to run, except along the ledge. The gorge was filled with water, almost to the top of the table. Farther down along the gorge, bathed in moonlight, he could see Belden's Dam towering into the night sky. A glance to his right told him that the river had flowed into this gorge and formed a natural reservoir. He was trapped now, nowhere to run. Riker and Carver were right behind him. No time to duck back into the trees. Trying to hold down his panic, he looked back again. He could hear the two men crashing about and then saw them emerge from the grove farther upstream. They spotted him immediately and began to fire. Bullets whizzed over Clayton's head as he took the one and only alternative left to him. He heaved himself over the ledge, hands still tied behind his back, into the deep waters of the gorge. Chapter 11. The Big Flush. Bullets spattered the water around him as he plunged downward, while the two gunmen reached the ledge and fired repeatedly after the G-Man. Clayton sank below the surface momentarily and bobbed up again, breaking the surface. More bullets splashed around him. He gulped a lungful of air, threw himself sideways, doubled at the waist, and plunged back beneath the still waters. "Hold your fire," Riker bellowed to Carver. "Wait until he comes back up for air." Clayton's body sank deeper into the reservoir. He pulled savagely at the now water-soaked rawhide strips that bound his hands and found them begin to stretch. Down, down he went. His chest began to ache. Harder and harder he pulled his arms apart, the rawhide finally stretching enough for him to pull one hand almost free. Continuing to work at his bonds, he kicked his legs to propel him upward. He needed air. His chest felt like it was about to burst. Up, 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 he floated, still pulling at the rawhide strips. Finally, the right hand slid free, just as his head burst above the surface. Once again, bullets plopped around him. Another gulp of air, and Jack dove back beneath the surface. With his hands now free, he could swim underwater just deep enough to not be seen, but close enough to the surface to chance popping up for air occasionally. Up on the ledge, the two gunmen waited for the G-Man to come back up for air. He would have to come up sometime, and they would be ready. Clayton was trapped between them and the dam with no means of escape, unless he could swim upstream, which was highly unlikely. Minute after minute passed by. The gunman grew frustrated with impatience. "He's got to come up sometime," Carver whined. "Hey, maybe we got him after all, or maybe he drowned." "Nah, his body would be floated to the surface. He's down there all right. I don't know how he's doing it, but I'm gonna fix him." He started to move away from ledge. "Stay here and watch for him. He pops up, plug him." "What are you?" Carver started as Riker headed downstream toward the dam. "I'm gonna flush him out." Riker's laughter echoed across the gorge. Meanwhile, Clayton had swum to the side of the gorge beneath the ledge above where the outlaws waited. The walls of the gorge here were slippery and smooth, extending straight upward with no ridges or indents for handholds. There would be no climbing out of the gorge here, but he could brace himself against the wall beneath the surface, tread water, keep his head above water, and breathe the blessed, fresh night air. He would rest a while, then he would have to figure something out. But what? He was trapped. He couldn't swim upstream, and there was no other way out of the reservoir that he could see. Burl Riker was still smiling with self-satisfaction as he neared the dam at the far end of the gorge. He'd fixed that pesky G-Man for good. He would open the floodgate and flush him right through under the dam. The valley ranchers would reap the benefit of new water for free, but he thought it was worth it. His boss may not think so, but hell, he was in charge here. Besides, he would enjoy seeing Clayton try to squirm out of this one. As he climbed onto the riverbank, he could see the control shack that had been set up for guards and for a keeper of the floodgates. It was a small square hut built on a wooden platform that also supported a 6-foot tower-like structure, housing a large wheel with handles along its circumference, much like the helm of a ship. A system of beams, pulleys, and cables ran across the gorge near the top of the dam. Vertical cables hung from this system attached to the floodgates at the base of the dam. Riker quickly mounted the platform, released the braking lever to put the wheel in gear, and started turning, a gleeful grin on his face. In his hiding place, still trying to figure out a plan of escape, Jack's thoughts were interrupted by a strange noise echoing across the gorge. It wasn't any kind of animal sound, or any other kind of sound he had ever heard before. It sounded more mechanical, like metal screeching against metal and the creak of moving wood. Then a crashing, sucking roar with a huge splashing sound that lasted only an instant. The stillness of the water seemed to gradually subside. Or was it his imagination? Gradually, the water around him seemed to rock in small rippling waves, and he found himself bouncing about like a rowboat on a choppy sea. Steadily the movement increased, and the waters churned more rapidly. Now he knew what was happening. The floodgates had been opened. The noise he had heard was the movement of the cables, the sucking sound of the gates rising out of the riverbed, and the first gush of water through the opening. They were flushing him out. His first thought was to cling to the rocky side of the gorge, but it was no use. It was too slippery and smooth. He felt himself descending along the wall as the water level started to fall. At first, the water's movement had been fairly negligible, but with each passing moment, it seemed to churn and swirl more. Clayton could feel a current pushing against him, sliding him along the wall, edging closer toward the dam. At first, it was just a gentle push, then a shove. He began to bump into the wall, bounce away, only to be slammed against it again and again. The waters were churning faster now. Foam was starting to fleck on the surface, and he found himself steadily floating toward the dam. Each time he slammed into the rock wall, he seemed to hit with a greater force. Soon he would be emerging out from under the protection of the ledge above and be a target once more. He would no longer need to hover around the pounding wall anyways, so he might as well push away farther into the reservoir and avoid the beating he was taking from the wall. He knew as soon as he was visible to the outlaws, firing would resume. His only chance was to go back underwater to avoid being seen, but this meant being without air again. But there was no other alternative. Taking a huge gulp of air and filling his lungs completely, he pushed off from the wall, bent at the waist, and dived back underwater. At first, he didn't dive deep. He needed to be close enough to the surface to chance another lungful of air. But when he finally came up for air again, the bullets started flying, this time from two directions, upstream and downstream. Carver on the ledge and Riker on the platform near the dam. The plop, plop of the bullets in the water was now muted by the churning of the waters, and the current was now so strong that Jack could feel it carrying him onward with accelerating force. The choppy current swelled into waves that struck him in the face, pushing him backward to sink once again beneath the surface. He drank in air just before going under. He twisted his body into a prone level position, stroking smoothly and swimming underwater, with the current propelling him closer and closer to the dam. He could feel the downward pressure of the water as it sought to retreat beneath the dam through the open floodgates. Greater and greater, the pressure grew. He knew he was being sucked downward. At the rate he was traveling, he would slam headlong into the dam wall with tremendous force. There was only one chance left open to him, and he took it. With a jackknife turn, he twisted and dived deeper, letting the pressure of the water above and the escaping stream through the gates suck him further downward toward the base of the dam. His air supply had just about run out now, and he was too far from the surface to get more. His chest ached unmercifully, his teeth clenched as he held his breath and swam downward. Finally, he saw, ahead of him, the gaping gates. He kicked forward and swam into the channel, feeling the raging tug of the current as it burst through the gate openings. Down, down, down he propelled, letting the swift current carry him further into the escape channel. He had held his breath as long as he could now. His chest felt like it would burst. There was no choice left but to exhale slowly, letting the air out gradually, hoping to make it last until he was through the gates. Closer and closer he approached the opening. The force of the water, now extremely strong, drew him swiftly into the channel. He bounced against the sides of the gate as he went through, the churning waters heaving him with tremendous force. As the last bit of air expelled through his tightly held lips, Clayton felt his body being thrown upward, the current swirling and churning beneath him. Water raged into his nostrils, and his lips parted, taking on an unwanted gulp. He felt the water lash against his eyes as he realized he had been catapulted above the surface as the escaping waters left the gate and spread outward in both directions, filling the previously dried-up riverbed. A breath of air mingled with the water gushed into his lungs. He choked and went under again. Again and again, he was thrown to the surface, alternating darkness beneath the waters, and quick flashes of moonlight flashed through his brain as semi-consciousness set in. He felt himself being swept away in the current, and then all went black as he slid into complete unconsciousness and drifted away into a black void.